Hey guys, today I'll show you an apocalyptic horror TV series named The Day After Vijit Pawsley, Season 3. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama picks up right where the last season left off. After the lab of the biopharmaceutical company Summit was overrun by mutants, the company's management had no choice but to announce an indefinite delay in vaccine research. The official armed forces quickly intervened, commencing a sweeping cleanup of the entire Moscow area. Survivors in good health were all moved out of the virus quarantine zone. The black-eyed, chicken-screaming mutants became highly sought-after subjects, with many TV platforms using them as gimmicks for reality TV shows. However, Summit Company's unethical practices were rarely mentioned. Even more frustratingly, Summit Company did not face any substantial punishment. Only one of its senior executives was placed under house arrest, waiting for an investigation. The remaining survivors from the last season left the quarantine zone and started living normal lives. Only the tech expert Scat still stayed within the quarantine area. He had an important task to complete. That was to infiltrate the Summit Company lab and steal their core database. That would be the key evidence to bring them down. Scat was accompanied by a little girl named Lena, whom he had accidentally met on the street. Although the lab's guards had been cleared, the surrounding area was filled with good-looking mutants. Scat and Lena managed to sneak into the lab, only to find more good-looking mutants inside. Lena confidently suggested she scout ahead, as she had noticed during her time wandering outside that mutants seemingly did not attack little girls. Scat was about to refuse when he turned around and found Lena had already disappeared. He quickly followed down the hallway, barely making out a figure in the distance. As Scat put on his headphones, he didn't expect a sexy mutant to be standing right behind him and screaming like a sexy chicken, causing him to collapse instead of turning him on. Meanwhile, Lena was much luckier. The mutants indeed did not initiate an attack on her. Possibly she was too smelly. Soon in the lobby, Lena encountered the zombie queen, Nadia, whose psychic powers were so strong that she could not only control mutants, but also influence the actions of living people. At this point, Scott was still struggling on the ground, unable to withstand the mutant's beauty. Luckily, the handsome hunk Mitya appeared just in time and casually dismissed the sexy mutant without hormone mercy. He told Scat that headphones were not useful at close ranges. Unexpectedly, Mitya and his mutated girlfriend Nadia had taken the lab as their backyard. Now, Scott successfully accessed Summit Company's database. He planned to copy the data and then leave Moscow. Seeing that Mitya intended to stay with Nadia, Scott warned him to be careful as the military was cleaning up the entire city, and they would eventually reach here. Mitya initially didn't take it seriously until Nadia sensed strangers approaching. They went outside to find several mutants lying on the ground, and then another companion was shot in the head. Mitya quickly pulled Nadia back into the lab. Scott saw through the surveillance that a large number of soldiers had broken in. They had to leave immediately. Nadia wanted to stay and fight with her zombie companions, but Mitya reminded her of the child in her belly. Nadia compromised and then hurriedly fled the lab with Mitya. In the blink of an eye, she had changed into a new outfit and approached an ambulance driver. She tried to employ her mind control, but it unexpectedly failed. Thankfully, Mitya appeared just in time and easily knocked the driver out. Nadia didn't have time to figure out why her mind control had failed as they rushed onto the ambulance. The tech expert Scat hacked into the military system using a computer, creating new identities for everyone, successfully deceiving the guards. They finally managed to escape the quarantine zone. Now, they had to contemplate how to return to normal life. The group of 4 went their separate ways. Scat had a clear goal: to help Lena find her lost mother. Nadia's situation was far more complicated. Her black eyes were easily identifiable. The other members of the survivor group had already begun their new lives. Mercenary Andrew, infiltrated from outside the quarantine zone, reported back to his employer, only to find out he was a military bigwig. He assigned Andrew a new mission: to find Nadia, who could control mutants. The official had already classified the Kleto virus as a biological weapon and needed to firmly control it. The bigwig reminded Andrew not to disclose any details about the Summit Company. The motorcyclist Olga, who had escaped with Andrew, was also assigned a job by the military to be a sparring partner in the training room. Compared to them, Valera's situation was far more tragic. After being under high pressure in the quarantine zone for a long time, he was maladjusted to normal life. He was suspicious of everyone he met. His girlfriend, the reporter, specially found a psychologist for him, but it didn't seem to help much. Now, Valera had nothing and had to go to the slums to make a living. The area was filled with refugees who had escaped from Moscow, all engaged in the most tiring and cheapest work. The reporter, who had a lot of information about mutants, was quickly noticed by a large television station. The manager planned to tailor a program for her as long as all the content was audited before broadcasting. She wanted to refuse, but her phone suddenly rang. Andrew repeated the military bigwig's warning, causing the reporter to abandon the idea of exposing the Summit Company's crimes. She eventually agreed to the TV manager's request. As expected, her program was warmly received by the audience. However, it mainly focused on how the survivors escaped, making no mention of Summit's crimes. The manager was pleased with her performance and decided to hire her as a permanent employee. The reporter was delighted. It was an excellent opportunity for her to achieve fame and success. Meanwhile, the military bigwig met with the head of the National Security Department. In order to develop the virus vaccine faster, he wanted to introduce Eva, the former director of Summit Company, to help with the research. The military bigwig was surprised and reluctant to cooperate with her when he found out who she was. After all, everything the military was doing now was essentially cleaning up the mess caused by Summit Company. But Eva denied her involvement, blaming all previous actions on the company's senior leadership. She offered to switch sides and help, especially since she knew everything about the Summit's virus lab, making her the best candidate for developing the vaccine. The military bigwig was convinced by her words. Thus, Eva transformed, taking on the role of military head, regaining control of the Summit Lab, and renaming it the International Virus Research Institute. Unexpectedly, on her first day in office, Eva welcomed a special visitor. It's Petya, the research assistant of his professor, the inventor of the Clado virus. Eva personally greeted Petya. Being a person who always used any means to achieve his goals, this man reignited his ambition in research with the support of an entire lab. Instantly, Petya put aside the official request for vaccine research and declared his main focus was to control the mutants, perfect soldiers in his eyes. Eva was secretly delighted. This aligns perfectly with her initial fantasy. She signaled to Petya to boldly proceed, but if discovered, he must claim all ideas as his own. Petya naturally didn't care about such accusations and delved into new research. Watching all this, Eva admired Petya's dedication, even unabashedly flattering him. She took the opportunity to bring up Nadia, who not only possessed self-awareness, but could also control other mutants and even humans. It was likely due to her being pregnant. Petya's interest was piqued, and he thought Eva initially wanted to use him to find Nadia's whereabouts, but she didn't know that he had already become enemies with the survivors in the bunker. After a night of thinking, Petya came up with an alternative plan. If they couldn't capture Nadia, they could create pregnant mutants for research. Eva chuckled. She had thought of this method a long time ago, but now, with the military's strong involvement, she didn't dare to infect pregnant women with the virus. Petya was indeed a reincarnated mad scientist, saying that if that was not allowed, he could make mutants pregnant through artificial insemination. Even if discovered later, they could explain it as a requirement of the experiment. Eva broke into a smile. When two bad seeds get together, they indeed come up with outrageous ideas. Meanwhile, the zombie queen Nadia they were seeking was brought to an apartment by Mitya. He said it was his best friend's place where they could stay temporarily. Nadia was still somewhat uneasy. Mitya persuaded her to take a bath to relax while he went out to buy some necessities. But when Nadia came out after bathing, she found a strange man sitting outside. It turned out that Mitya's best friend had returned unexpectedly. Nadia quickly ran back to put on her sunglasses and deliberately kept a safe distance from him. To her surprise, the friend claimed he and Mitya used to share girlfriends and immediately removed Nadia's sunglasses. When Mitya returned after shopping, he only saw his best friend lying on the ground, covered in blood, obviously killed by Nadia in a loss of control. Mitya was furious and took Nadia to a desolate suburb. He believed that only by staying far from the hustle and bustle could they live in peace. Afterward, Nadia crossed the eerie and terrifying forest, unaware of the mutant lurking behind her. Mitya tried to catch up with Nadia, only to come face to face with the mutant. Scared, Mitya turned to run, but ended up running into another mutant head-on. He was trapped by sexy mutants with no escape, but at the crucial moment, the two mutants stopped their attack. It was Nadia who had come to the rescue. Still in shock, Mitya cursed the presence of mutants here, but surprisingly, they suddenly regained their human consciousness. All four of them were stunned by what had just happened. The two mutants then led Mitya and his companion to an abandoned mansion, their temporary dwelling place. Seeing the two ugly and lustful men in the hall, Mitya understood everything. It turned out that it was not only Nadia, but the two mutants in front of him also intermittently returned to their human form due to the care of their lustful boyfriends. The only difference was that they did not have the ability to control other mutants. When the Summit Company was just annihilated, these people took advantage of the chaos to escape the sealed area and settled here. This place was the ancestral property of one of the mutants. Only a blind grandfather lived on the first floor. The old man did not know that his granddaughter had become a mutant and advised everyone not to run around, as the villagers here were not friendly to outsiders. But Mitya dismissed the old man's dying bullshit. He believed with his charming personality, getting along with the villagers wasn't a problem. The next morning, Mitya went to a small village not far away. With a few words, he struck up a conversation with the villagers. Although the place was remote, it was the best refuge for Moscow refugees. The villagers worried that the outsiders would bring the virus, so they were very exclusive. That night, several villagers suddenly ran to the mansion's gate, saying they had noticed a refugee from Moscow and intended to search the mansion. Mitya was about to refuse when the lead man received a call, saying that the refugee had run in the direction of the forest. This frustrated Nadia, since it seemed like staying here wasn't going to be easy. Over at Skat's, after parting with Mitya, he started to help the little girl Lena look for her missing mother everywhere. Their efforts were rewarded when they bumped into her in a park. Sadly, Lena's mother had been released from quarantine after receiving immunity treatment at the Summit Company, and all her memories had been erased. Skat took out a photo of the mother and daughter and explained for a long time before she reluctantly accepted the truth that Lena was her daughter. Regardless, Skat felt a sense of relief, having fulfilled a wish. He now had more important things to do. After going around, Skat arrived at a hidden underground apartment. It's one of his hacker friend's hideouts. However, the person who opened the door was his friend's hot sister, nicknamed Miss Hot. She said her brother had disappeared after the virus outbreak, leaving a computer to be handed over to Skat. Miss Hot had tried several times, but couldn't turn it on. Skat wasn't worried. After a bit of tinkering, the computer left by his hacker friend successfully started. His friend had recorded a video explaining the situation. It turned out that when the virus broke out, Skat was taken as an experimental subject and locked in a bunker. His hacker friend, in order to find him, used a lot of resources to investigate. Eventually, all clues pointed to the Summit Company, so he collected a lot of evidence and posted it online, hoping to blackmail Summit into releasing Skat. However, his posts sank into oblivion and his location was traced. Skat was saddened, realizing that his hacker friend was likely captured by Summit, his fate unknown. At this point, the reporter was doing good at her TV show. The program director, in order to increase the watchability of the show, had especially invited a guest from the quarantine zone. When the reporter opened the file, she was surprised to find that the guest was none other than the little girl, Lena. The story of the mother and daughter's difficult reunion had whetted the audience's appetite, pushing the program to new heights. On the other side, Skat, having learned from the lesson of his hacker friend, decided not to post the evidence of Summit's crimes online. Instead, he made a copy and gave it to the reporter, hoping she could find a suitable opportunity to expose it in her show. But the reporter thought it was difficult because any show had to be reviewed before it could be broadcast. But she still took the copy of the evidence, hoping it might come in handy in the future. No sooner had Skat left than she was visited by the mercenary Andrew. He had made the trip to warn her not to speak out of turn on the show. The reporter secretly went to her office and turned on her computer, finding a wealth of experimental data and surveillance videos on the hard drive Skat had given her. Many of them documented the inhumane persecution of survivors. Just then, the station manager came to inform her that the company had arranged a party in her honor and hoped she would bring her boyfriend from the quarantine zone. Valera initially wanted to decline, but he didn't want to spoil his girlfriend's mood, so he reluctantly agreed. Early the next morning, Valera arrived at the company. People were very curious about him and kept asking about the various details of the mutants. But Valera didn't want to discuss this. He said Summit was even more terrifying than the mutants. Everyone looked skeptical and egged him on to elaborate. Suddenly, Valera became agitated, pleading with them not to treat others' suffering as an entertaining performance. He gave the manager a pat on the shoulder and left. But as soon as he walked out the door, several security guards rushed over and pinned him down for leaving without signing out. After the reporter explained the situation, Valera was finally released. He felt frustrated, saying he would never forget the hardships he had experienced in the quarantine zone, and he wouldn't let the culprits get away scot-free. Seeing his determination, the reporter decided to return to the company and explain the situation to her colleagues, while Valera returned to the slums to continue his labor. Unexpectedly, Olga came to see him. Seeing how hard Valera was working, she wanted to help him find a job as a mercenary, but he declined outright, saying he had gotten used to his freedom. Just then, a coworker came over to strike up a conversation. When he learned that Olga was from the quarantine zone, he immediately showed a look of disgust. Enraged, Valera attacked him, only stopping when the foreman intervened. Witnessing Valera's temper, the foreman fired him on the spot. Olga admired Valera's passionate and straightforward character. She took him to her workplace to distract him. As they reminisced about their shared experiences from the quarantine zone, they found themselves exchanging a heated kiss, but possibly without using their juicy tongues. But Olga suddenly came to her senses and realized their actions were inappropriate, given that they both had significant others. The station manager had assigned the reporter a special task to interview at the quarantine zone lab. She was thrilled and eagerly looked over her pass to the quarantine zone and the list of interview questions. But her excitement quickly turned to disappointment. The questions were superficial and would not reveal the secrets of the lab. Worse still, when she arrived at the lab, all the mutants had their faces hidden behind masks. The security chief explained it was to protect them from being identified by their families. The person the reporter was supposed to interview was none other than her arch-nemesis, Petya, who was now in charge of the lab research. Although she maintained her composure outwardly, she quietly made a call to the manager to refuse the interview. The manager threatened to replace her if she did not comply, so the reporter reluctantly agreed. The interview was staged, with all the questions and answers pre-planned. Every attempt she made to ask a poignant question was interrupted by the security chief or outright rejected by Petya. After the interview, Petya sought the reporter out to commend her for her restraint, acknowledging that although she wanted him dead, she had acted professionally. The reporter did not deny this, but managed to maintain her professional smile. However, when she returned to the station, she was shocked to learn that the interview was edited and turned into a praise fest for Summit and Petya, painting them as the beacon of hope for humanity. The reporter went to confront the manager, arguing that the interview was a distortion of the truth. The manager countered that the people in the lab were fighting for the health of the nation and that the hit interview would boost her popularity and allow her to express more of her opinions on her show. Torn between her principles and her career prospects, the reporter chose to compromise. The interview aired nationwide that night. When Valera saw the interview, his face contorted with anger, leading to a huge argument between him and his girlfriend. The reporter accused Valera of being stuck in the past, urging him to look towards the future for a better life. Valera was heartbroken, realizing she had never truly understood him. After a long silence, Valera initiated their breakup. The reporter, heated in the moment, left without even taking her bag. Valera took out the quarantine pass from her bag and tucked it into his own pocket. Perhaps for him, the virus quarantine zone was where he truly belonged. Meanwhile, Mitya and the others hiding in the manor were startled by a commotion outside. A little girl from the village had gone missing, and the villagers were out in full force, searching for her. Despite the grandfather's stern refusal to let anyone in, the villagers were adamant. Just as they were about to break down the door, the mutants inside switched to combat mode. The sound of a gunshot caused everyone to freeze momentarily, diffusing the tense atmosphere. The gunshot attracted a nearby police officer, and the villagers were taken to the station for trespassing, averting a potential conflict. However, Nadia wasn't relieved. She wondered how long they would have to live in hiding. She even considered returning to the quarantine zone, where they could live freely. And she wasn't the only one. The other mutants shared her sentiment. Mitya sensed the group's discontent, and surprisingly, he led them into a deserted forest late at night. He planned to hold a bonfire party here to help everyone release their depression. The young group had a blast. When Nadia went out for a breath of fresh air, she suddenly sensed a stranger's presence nearby. Instantly, she morphed into her mutant form. As she approached the source of the scent, she discovered it was the little girl from the village who had gone missing. Nadia, soon to be a mother herself, felt her heart soften. She led the little girl out of the forest, letting her go home alone when they neared the village. Unexpectedly, the little girl was quite resilient, only shouting about the mutants when she was dozens of meters away. News of this incident quickly spread throughout the village. Some villagers suggested calling the police, but Mitya interrupted them, pointing out that the village would certainly be quarantined. The impulsive leader boy thought this made sense and decided to mobilize the villagers to investigate the forest first. Mitya returned to inform his companions. While the two mutant girls were panicked, they couldn't help but blame Nadia for intervening. If she hadn't saved the girl, there would have been no incident, but Nadia believed that the girl was a living being after all. Confronted with the villagers' hunt, they didn't have to sit and wait for their fate. In the early morning, the dense forest was shrouded in thick fog. The villagers, armed, searched everywhere for the mutant mentioned by the little girl. Suddenly, a mutant's shriek echoed from not far away. Everyone anxiously looked around. It seemed the little girl hadn't lied, but the foggy forest made it impossible to find a mutant who was intent on hiding. The villagers became nervous. They could feel the mutant was close, but they couldn't see any. They never wanted to experience this kind of anxiety again. Mitya casually asked the impulsive leader boy about his thoughts on mutants. Unexpectedly, his answer was unlike anything Mitya had anticipated. His former girlfriend had been infected with the virus but had never attacked him. Instead, she had been shot dead by the police. It seemed that the leader boy didn't reject mutants as absolutely as most people did. This absurd hunt ended hastily when the villagers were almost scared out of their wet pants. Back at the manor, Mitya was furious. Those villagers were armed, and the girls could have caused an accident by scaring them. Nadia was somewhat unconvinced, thinking they were not supposed to hide in the manor forever. She argued that they had already shown restraint by not killing anyone. Mitya was speechless. The conflict between the mutants and villagers had reached an irreconcilable point. Meanwhile, the station manager had once again arranged for the reporter to interview in the quarantine zone. However, she noticed her pass was missing. She decided to call Valera, but he hung up the call and turned off his phone. Valera wanted to keep the pass for himself and had decided to go to the quarantine zone. All he needed to do was find someone to replace the photo and information on the pass. When Valera returned to his residence to pack his stuff, Olga unexpectedly came over. Learning that Valera was going back into the quarantine zone, she couldn't help but berate him. But Valera had his own reasons. Ever since he learned that the Summit Lab was still running and that the madman Petya was alive, he hadn't slept a wink. Olga expressed that she couldn't bear to see Valera leave. As a result, they ended up wrestling their tongues and muscles in the open field. But the reporter happened to be looking for Valera at that moment and saw the Nasty Two's smelly hormone yoga session. She knew her relationship with Valera was definitely over. Upon returning to the company, the reporter found her manager to report her pass had been stolen. The manager quickly reported to the security bureau, warning the guards at the checkpoint to be wary of anyone attempting to pass through covertly. Poor Valera was planning to sneak into the quarantine zone with a counterfeit pass, but he was caught red-handed by the guards. Thankfully, Valera had a good relationship with Andrew from security, who knew about his purpose to go into the quarantine zone. Andrew scolded Valera, saying that criminals will naturally be punished by others. Valera challenged him if the evidence he collected against Summit was useful. Andrew fell silent for a moment, realizing Valera had a point. So he left the keys to the handcuffs, allowing Valera to figure out his own escape. Olga, in a surprising move, discreetly slipped Valera a phone card, a number only she knew. Andrew, however, noticed this little action. On the way back, Olga no longer pretended to like Andrew, declaring that it was not him she was interested in. She left her engagement ring in the car and walked away. It was clear that her love for Valera was genuine. That same night, she found the department head and requested to be transferred to work in the quarantine zone. Early the next morning, a group of young people arrived at the quarantine zone checkpoint. Their passes were all in order. Upon opening the trunk, it was filled with various weapons. The guards chose to let them through without much inspection, as the squad leader recognized the leading woman. She was a somewhat famous internet influencer domestically, who claimed to be a zombie hunter. Her father was a high-ranking military official. Their entrance into the quarantine zone was surely for the thrill of hunting down mutants. Just as Valera had hidden his stolen vehicle, he was attracted by a loud whistle. It was the internet influencer purposefully making noise, which soon attracted a mutant. She stood calmly in place as the mutant prepared to launch a sonic attack, only to be shot down. It turned out this group enjoyed torturing mutants for fun. The mutant kept getting up and getting shot down again and again. Valera, watching from the side, was furious. He remembered his ex-girlfriend and didn't believe mutants were just freaks for people's amusement. They had their own thoughts and joys, and sometimes they were more human than humans themselves. After finding the two snipers on the rooftop, Valera approached and knocked one of them out. He then took a shot from a high vantage point, scaring off the influencer. The mutant, relying on its recovery ability, struggled to get up and fled the scene. Valera wanted to kill the sniper, but ultimately held back. Unexpectedly, in the next moment, he was shot in the ankle as revenge from the influencer. Valera dragged his injured body, hid in an abandoned lobby, and finally lost his senses. Sometime later, he was roused by the ringing of a phone. Valera knew it had to be Olga calling, so he didn't hesitate to hang up. But to his surprise, when he woke up the next day, Olga had used the phone's location to find him. By now, she had managed to transfer to work in the safety bureau of the quarantine zone. Her movements were no longer secretive. However, Valera didn't want her to get tangled up in this mess again, which is why he had hung up the call. But Olga seemed to be intoxicated by love. When she found out about Valera's plan to confront the virus lab, she planned to join him in his actions. Valera refused her, advising Olga to work at the safety bureau, as she might be able to provide more help that way. During the days he was healing, Valera collected many gas cans and discarded foam. Olga was puzzled, asking if he was planning to blow up the virus lab. But Valera just wanted to create a commotion to draw out Petya and the person in charge, as the chances of killing them outside were higher. Olga tried to dissuade him, but Valera was full of determination, stating someone had to do these things, or even more innocent people would be harmed. Meanwhile, within the virus lab in the quarantine zone, Petya was artificially inseminating mutants, trying to turn them into unique individuals like the zombie queen Nadia. But the results were disappointing. 3 mutants in a row couldn't even complete the first step of insemination. Ava, the person in charge, was disappointed with Petya's performance and ordered him to find a mutant carrying a healthy fetus at all costs. This put enormous pressure on Petya, who was still looking for a solution at dawn. At this point, an assistant came over to ask if working there while pregnant would expose her to the virus. Petya's eyes lit up and suggested she should have a health check. The next day, the assistant started feeling unwell. Petya, in his madness, had actually injected his pregnant assistant with the mutant virus. Ava was impressed with his work, but hypocritically reminded Petya that his actions violated lab rules. Leaning against the wall, Petya smiled without saying a word, knowing that she didn't want to take responsibility. He promised to submit a perfect report. Overjoyed, the lustful Ava invited Petya to her room for a muscle interaction that evening. Early the next morning, Eva rushed to the lab hall. The pregnant assistant was shockingly locked up with a mutant. Not too long after, her eyes turned pitch black as she completely transformed into a mutant herself. Petya explained that he discovered her accidental infection with the mutant virus during her checkup yesterday, so he had to isolate her. Eva raised her voice in praise of Petya's vigilance in detecting a potential threat in time. But an innocent, expectant mother became the test subject of these 2 madmen. Before Petya had a chance to further investigate, the mutant suddenly began bleeding profusely and collapsed on the floor, appearing to be on the verge of death. Without question, Petya's experimental plan had failed once again. He hadn't anticipated that the virus would kill the fetus. Ava had a gloomy expression and was about to turn to leave when she suddenly received a phone call. Her troubled face immediately brightened. She informed Petya that there was no need to continue trying, as the person was about to arrive at the lab. Seeing Nadia, who was tied up and secured on the experiment table, Petya and Ava broke into smiles. This was a delightful surprise for them. With this special mutant as their research subject, a virus vaccine and a method of controlling mutants seemed within reach. But Petya was still somewhat puzzled, not knowing how exactly Nadia was brought to the lab. The scene flashes back to 2 days ago when Nadia was still in a manor outside the quarantine zone, arguing with Mitya. Nadia's mutant companions believed they should leave, arguing that even returning to the quarantine zone would be better than staying there. However, the boys were more inclined to live in human society. After a long, unresolved debate, Mitya had a sudden thought. What if they could live peacefully with the villagers? So he sought out the leader boy and tentatively asked if he would still be with his mutant girlfriend if she regained her sanity. Seeing him nod without hesitation, Mitya was pleased and ran back to his companions and told them that he had a way to make the villagers accept them. But Nadia opposed him, saying she still wanted to return to the quarantine zone because she believed humans were more dangerous than mutants. At this moment, the manor's elderly landlord came over to interrupt the group. He was going to pick mushrooms in the forest and needed someone to accompany him. Nadia, not wanting to continue arguing with Mitya, took this opportunity to go with the old man. Once deep into the forest, the old man warned Nadia to keep a close eye on her boyfriend Mitya. He hadn't recognized the villagers' cunning and deceit, which would inevitably lead to disaster. The old man suggested that Nadia should leave with his granddaughter as soon as possible. Nadia was taken aback. She hadn't expected that he had already seen through her mutant identity. The old man, with a stern face, explained that he was blind but not deaf. Back at the manor, the mutants were still debating whether to stay or go when Mitya led the leader boy in. He was highly respected among the villagers and did not discriminate against mutants. The two mutants knew they couldn't hide any longer, so they took off their glasses, revealing their black eyelashes. The leader boy was momentarily stunned, but soon regained his composure. He quickly bonded with the mutants, stating that they were hardly different from ordinary people. Mitya suddenly asked a few people to leave, saying he had something to discuss. Only one guy remained and quietly walked up to the leader boy, revealing that he was forced to stay and wanted to collaborate with him to contact the police to arrest these mutants. Before the leader boy could respond, Mitya led the group back into the hall. After some discussion, they decided to host a party with the local villagers to promote integration. The leader boy agreed, expressing confidence in persuading his companions to attend. The party was set for the following evening. As Mitya escorted the leader boy out of the manor, the latter suddenly warned him to be careful, revealing that there was a traitor among them. But Mitya smiled and extended his hand to congratulate him on passing the test. It turned out that the so-called traitor was just a test for him. At this moment, Mitya was more confident about the future integration plan. In the forest, the old man saw that they had collected enough mushrooms and proposed to return early. However, Nadia mentioned she wanted to wander a little more and suggested the old man head back first. She had already noticed someone was tailing her. After sending the old man away, Nadia didn't have any more concerns. She directly approached the stalker and caught him off guard. The man, fully aware of her potency, confessed that he was hired by the Summit Company to capture Nadia. She didn't want to kill anymore and warned him to tell his employer to stop sending people to their doom. As dusk descended, the mutants in the manor were still looking forward to the village gathering the next day. Suddenly, the leader boy visited, bringing good news. When he entered the hall, he curiously asked where Mitya was. His friend explained that Mitya had gone looking for his mushroom-picking girlfriend. The leader boy nodded, then abruptly shot one of the mutants. More villagers rushed in, and the remaining mutants retaliated with a sonic attack, only to be interrupted by gunshots. The leader boy, with a gruesome expression, shouted to leave no one alive. When the old man of the manor returned, these villagers were already cleaning up. The bodies of 2 men and 2 women were neatly arranged. The old man reprimanded them, saying there were humans among them too, and aimed his gun to fire. However, the leader boy shot first. Mitya, in the forest, had already met up with Nadia, who seemed somewhat flustered. She sensed the emotional fluctuations of the mutant girl, but Mitya assured her that he had made the villagers accept the mutants. But when they arrived at the manor, they saw flames reaching for the sky. Mitya collapsed, while Nadia sensed the death of their mutant companions. Knowing they couldn't stay any longer, they left under the cover of darkness. Nadia remembered the old man's warning and reproached Mitya for his arrogance, resulting in them being played by the villagers. Mitya was heavily hit by this outcome, but he just wanted a normal life. Nadia accused him of being the real murderer and walked away. Mitya made a decision, saying they should never see each other again. Nadia lost control and let out a piercing scream, causing Mitya to roar in pain and collapse to the ground. When he woke up, he found himself tied to a tree. Nadia had abandoned him, and the villagers who arrived took advantage of the situation. The leader boy mocked Mitya. Although he didn't discriminate against mutants, he was still afraid they transmitted the virus to the villagers. Seeing Mitya was still not willing to disclose Nadia's whereabouts, he decided to search for her with his men, leaving only one villager to watch Mitya. Shortly after they left, a sharp dagger slashed the villager's throat. The assassin hired by Summit had appeared. After taking Mitya to an abandoned underground mall, the assassin revealed his brutal nature. He tortured Mitya, who screamed in agony until he was on the verge of collapse. Finally, the assassin asked where Nadia was. Mitya lied that Nadia was staying at a friend's house. He didn't expect that Nadia, due to the breakup, had become despondent. Coupled with a lack of glucose energy injection for a long time, she fainted during a police interrogation before she could use her sonic attack. Meanwhile, Andrew was called into the office again for a reprimand. The military bigwig was dissatisfied with his performance. They wanted to know why there was still no trace of Nadia and ordered him to find her within a month. The chief of the Security Bureau, aware that the Clato virus had reached a level affecting national security, promised to lead a team to search for Nadia personally. However, just as he stepped out of the office, he heard a report from the police. They had found Nadia unconscious by the roadside. Thus, Nadia was sent to the virus lab by the Security Bureau. Ava, the person in charge of the lab, was familiar with Nadia's power. She used a face mask to prevent Nadia's sonic attacks and wore a metal ring on her head that could read brain activity. If Nadia tried to use psychic control on someone, the ring would release an electric current to interrupt her. Petya advised her not to resist anymore. If she cooperated and helped the lab develop an antidote to the virus, perhaps Nadia and her child could lead a normal life. Outside the quarantine zone, Scat, using his hacking skills, found the boss of the Summit Company, which was under investigation and surveillance since Summit was overturned. He claimed to have a lot of evidence of the Summit's wrongdoing. If they didn't want this evidence to be exposed, they should release his hacker friend immediately. The boss initially did not take this seriously. However, the next day, he received a stack of documents that recorded numerous instances of the Summit's experimental misconduct. This panicked the boss, who immediately had his lawyer start gathering information. The next day, Scat received a call from the boss. The only thing he had found out was that his hacker friend had been taken by Summit to experiment on another project. Scat wanted to use the release of the documents as a threat, but the boss stated that if he released the documents, the project manager would kill his hacker friend to cover up the traces. This was Summit's emergency handling procedure. Scat was suddenly caught between a rock and a hard place. He did not fully believe what the boss said, so he used his hacking skills to invade the boss's home. Through video surveillance, he learned more details. Unexpectedly, his hacker friend was taken to a project called Glacier. As for the specific experimental content, even his lawyer's assistant couldn't find out because all of Summit's projects were completely independent. The only person who might know was the professional assassin who was responsible for the captures. After hearing this, Scat made a mental note of the assassin's name. However, what he never expected was that the assassin would actually contact him. Of course, this was all a trap set up by Mitya. His real intention was to get Scat to come and rescue him quickly. However, professional assassins are not so easily fooled. He required Scott to provide a recent photo of Nadia within 10 minutes. Scat hung up the phone and realized that Mitya was in great danger. But where could he find a recent photo of Nadia? At this moment, Nadia was still bound to the bed in the virus lab. Although most of her abilities were restricted, she managed to remotely call for her companions. Not only in the lab, but even the mutants wandering outside were all heading towards the lab. A massive battle was on the horizon. The researchers were cautious, not even daring to provide the most basic glucose, all to ensure Nadia remained weak. Petya tried to reassure her, claiming he was only interested in developing an antidote for the virus. He then took out a syringe, intending to extract placental stem cells. Nadia lifted her head, her eyes burning. The syringe suddenly began to move away from her skin, slowly moving toward Petya's forehead. Suddenly, a surge of electricity blocked Nadia's mental control. The recovered Petya felt he was lucky. If it weren't for the control ring on Nadia's head activating in time, he would be doomed. Eva rushed over, scolding Petya for his recklessness. However, Petya had his own thoughts. As long as he could explore and study, he never cared about his own life. After Eva left, Petya picked up the scalpel again. He first waved it near Nadia's neck, checking for any unusual brain activity. But as it approached her abdomen, Petya fell under Nadia's control once again. Just as Petya was about to slit his own throat, the control ring activated again, bringing him back to his senses. Despite his near-death experience, he was excited because he found that Nadia's control over others only activated when her unborn child was threatened. To show his sincerity, Petya removed Nadia's face mask. He explained that he only wanted to extract some stem cells from her baby to develop an antidote. Nadia was skeptical, asking if he wanted to study how to control mutants. But Petya denied, claiming that it was Eva's idea, not his. Nadia, who had always wanted to return to being a normal person, agreed to Petya's request after confirming that extracting stem cells would not harm her baby. Meanwhile, Scott was facing his greatest challenge yet. To rescue his bound friend Mitya, he had to find a recent photo of Nadia and send it to the assassin. Miss Hot, the hacker, did surprisingly well. She found a photo of Nadia online, slightly altering the hair and eye color. At a glance, it looked like a recently taken photo. Scat coded a small program to locate the assassin when he received the photo. The assassin believed Nadia was in Scott's possession and readily agreed to meet, unknowing he was being tricked. Once Scat confirmed the assassin was heading to the agreed meeting spot, he quietly infiltrated the abandoned mall where Mitya was indeed bound. When the stood-up assassin returned, he realized he had been tricked. Meanwhile, the security chief had just gotten out of his car at home when he was attracted by a small sphere. The next moment, he lost consciousness. The assassin had abducted the security chief. When he woke up, he was treated similarly to Mitya. Unfortunately, after confessing that Nadia was in the quarantine lab, the assassin killed him without hesitation. Mitya had been taken home by Scott. Upon hearing the assassin's name, Scat realized that the assassin was the one who had kidnapped his hacker friend. He wanted to find him and demand his friend's whereabouts. Mitya advised him to give up, claiming that the assassin was tough and Scott wouldn't stand a chance. Unless they could find Nadia, only then could they possibly deal with the assassin. Scott noticed something strange. The mutants in the quarantine zone were gathering at the lab. Mitya immediately thought that his girlfriend Nadia might have been taken to the lab. He felt they should check it out. But now the Security Bureau had taken over the defense system of the quarantine zone, and Scott couldn't crack it in a short time. Miss Hot, the hacker queen, offered to help. She had a friend who could get them into the quarantine zone. The next day, this friend showed up. She was actually the famous internet influencer. Because of her father's influence, she could freely enter and exit the quarantine zone to hunt mutants. Although the influencer had known Miss Hot since childhood, she wouldn't help Scat and Mitya for free. Mitya cheekily asked if she'd accept to take his body as payment, but she simply rolled her eyes. Scat could provide a device to track the mutants. With this tool, the influencer would have an even greater advantage. She was ecstatic and told everyone to get ready. Early the next morning, Scat and the others arrived in the quarantine zone in her truck. Miss Hot claimed the locator is hidden in a secret place and needs to be retrieved before it can be distributed. Mitya wanted to leave with them, but he was forcibly kept by the influencer. She reminded him not to forget the reward he had promised to her. Mitya was left speechless, considering that being too handsome is a trouble after all. Bidding farewell to his companions, the two of them started performing a public hormone yoga. This was Miss Hot's first time in the quarantine zone, and she was curious about everything around her. Scat urged her to take care of her hot body and went ahead to scout the path. But when he returned, he found that Miss Hot had already caught the attention of the mutants. Scat shouted anxiously, and the mutants surprisingly abandoned Miss Hot and rushed towards Scat, possibly because he was more attractive to those sexy mutants. He quickly shook off the mutants and fled the scene with the stunned Miss Hot. The two quickly reached a hidden basement, a dwelling point that Scat had prepared in the quarantine zone. Miss Hot seemed to have not recovered from the recent encounter, sitting on the floor lost in thought. Then, a figure appeared at the door. It was Mitya, who had not been gone for long. It turned out that he did not do anything fishy with the internet influencer, but instead tied her sexy body up and took the chance to escape. Due to her rich survival experience, the influencer was able to escape. Scat pulled out the locator, confirming that the mutants were still gathering near the lab. Their next task was to figure out a way to sneak into the lab. Meanwhile, after breaking up with Valera, the reporter's career reached unprecedented heights. Her supervisor initially criticized her for poor ratings. However, the reporter approached the chief editor of the TV station with her idea for a live interview. After some contemplation, the editor agreed to her request and even reprimanded the supervisor. The reporter was overjoyed, but on the surface, she pretended to be a little annoyed and told the supervisor that it was all for the ratings. She then invited him to be the first guest on her live interview because he also experienced the initial virus outbreak, and the audience was very interested in the great urban escape and the looters. The supervisor thought this was a good idea. Not only would it increase ratings, but it would also raise his own fame. Little did he know, all of this was part of the reporter's plan. Once the live interview began, the reporter did not follow the prearranged script, but instead asked the supervisor how he managed to escape from the quarantine zone with his family when the virus first broke out, given the scarce transportation at the time. The supervisor was taken aback. Then, another special guest walked onto the stage. It's a teacher who claimed his evacuation quota had been bought out and had only recently escaped from the quarantine area. Sadly, his family had already died inside. The reporter already knew that the supervisor had used his influence to collect a large number of evacuation quotas and sold them at a high price to his celebrity friends. The supervisor panicked, claiming it was slander. However, the audience's emotions had already been ignited, shouting that the supervisor deserved to die. The supervisor was infuriated and stood up to attack the reporter, but he was quickly stopped by staff. The consequence of this live broadcast accident was that the supervisor was taken away for investigation. The director scolded the reporter for breaking rules, but considering the record-breaking ratings of the show, he asked her to be more restrained when hosting in the future. The reporter was overjoyed knowing that she now had full control over the show. She instructed her assistant to prepare well, as tomorrow's broadcast would feature different content. In the lab, Petya had secured stem cells, working tirelessly on an antiviral remedy. Until one sample eradicated the cladovirus in the blood, he was overjoyed. He quickly shared the news with Ava and brought in a mutant for experimentation. After injecting the antiviral remedy, the mutant began to struggle violently, but showed no signs of recovery. Eva grew impatient and was about to leave when the mutant suddenly calmed down. On reopening her eyes, she could speak again, wondering why she had been hiding there. Everyone's faces broke into smiles. Without a doubt, Petya's antiviral remedy was effective. He turned to the first mutant who received the antiviral remedy and asked how she felt. Unexpectedly, the woman's eyes turned black again. His remedy only lasted a few hours. Unaware of this, Eva brought in a new researcher, insisting Petya hand over the remedy formula. He naturally refused, and Eva chose to confront him, ordering the security to seize him. Petya remained calm, gesturing Eva to look at the glass room. Inside, they discovered that the first test subject had turned into a corpse again. Eva quickly canceled the arrest order and took Petya to a secluded dark room. Eagerly, she asked if the antiviral remedy was ineffective. Petya said that the effect was there, but it was temporary and needed to be injected every few hours. Eva was desperate. Now only Petya held the formula for the remedy, and she would be at his mercy from now on. But Eva thought of a way to quickly develop a remedy, to extract the baby from Nadia for research, which would surely be more effective than using limited stem cells. Petya called her mad, comparing it to killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. But Eva didn't care. She had previously placed an explosive collar on Nadia's neck. With a press of the remote, Nadia's body could be separated, making it easy to extract the baby out of her. Petya was speechless, finding Eva even more terrifying when she got desperate. On the other hand, Scott and Mitya were unaware of Nadia's impending crisis. They were still researching how to enter the lab and rescue Nadia. To their surprise, Miss Hot had quietly left their place. She looked around the dark streets and saw a mutant in the distance. Miss Hot gathered her courage and approached. Surprisingly, the mutant ignored Miss Hot's hot body and walked away without hormone desire. Miss Hot was devastated, wondering why the mutants rejected her sexy body. But she was then hit by a sonic attack, falling to the ground in pain. Hearing the commotion, Scat rushed over. When they returned home, he kept asking Miss Hot why she had provoked the mutant. Miss Hot finally revealed that she had a rare terminal illness and was given only 3 months to live. No wonder the mutants avoided her. They only chose to infect healthy women. But she learned from Scat that mutants had super immune systems that could heal all wounds and diseases. This gave Miss Hot a glimmer of hope. She decided to take a chance and infect herself with the Clato virus. After confessing everything, Miss Hot was worried that Scat would reject her, but he immediately supported Miss Hot's decision. He believed their love could keep Miss Hot sane like Nadia. Mitya, having a say in this, believed the plan was highly feasible. However, only Nadia had the skills to infect Miss Hot, so rescuing her from the lab became urgent. Meanwhile, Valera, who was living in an abandoned school, was also figuring out a way to deal with the lab. Looking at a truck full of fuel, Olga asked in shock if he was planning to blow up the entire lab. Valera was gloomy, saying a truck full of fuel could cause significant casualties, but it might not necessarily kill Petya and Eva. Olga felt a chill down her spine and rebuked Valera that he was already blinded by hatred. She knew many innocent people in the lab would die because of that, and his doings were not any different from what Eva and her team were doing. But Valera didn't care. He felt everyone in the lab deserved to die. Olga was disappointed in him and decided to take legal action against them. At the same time, Scat was in a dilemma. The lab's security system had been upgraded to an independent network. To hack into it again, he needed to physically connect to the network inside the lab. Bravely, Scat disguised himself as a computer repairman in an attempt to infiltrate the virus lab. After barely deceiving the front desk guard, he was caught by the strict security manager. Just as Scat was about to be taken away for questioning, Olga, who was working in the security department, happened to pass by. Seeing her ex-boyfriend in trouble, she claimed that Scat was her driver, who was just curious and wanted to have a look inside. She then led him out of the lab. Scat didn't expect their reunion to be so awkward, so he decided to ask Olga for help one more time, to insert a USB drive into any computer in the lab. This was not difficult for Olga, as the virus lab was now under the jurisdiction of the security department. Using an audit as a pretext, she easily completed the task. Scat, typing at lightning speed, finally managed to hack into the lab's network. But the next step was even more dangerous. Who should they send into the lab to get Nadia out? Everyone thought of Valera, who was still fighting alone. Now, with Scott's hacking skills, he could sneak into the lab unnoticed and get close to Petya and the others without having to resort to any explosive plans. Valera was very tempted and immediately worked out a plan to infiltrate the lab with everyone. In the end, Mitya reminded him to rescue Nadia, but not to be so focused on revenge. On the other hand, the reporter has started her own live show, fully under her control. She invited a few survivors who had escaped from the quarantine zone, only to find that their lives had not improved. They were discriminated against by local residents and ended up living in dirty slums. The reporter's initial intention was to eliminate these prejudices, but the live audience reacted strongly, instinctively considering these people as the source of the plague. The reporter had to interrupt the live interview and ask the radical audience to leave the broadcasting room. As a result, the reporter was the only one left on stage for the entire live broadcast. The director was very dissatisfied with this episode. Not only did the ratings drop, but many advertisers also canceled their sponsorship due to the reporter's stance. No one wanted people coming out of the quarantine zone to disrupt their current lives. Regardless, the reporter still insisted on her view that people in the quarantine zone were victims and should be treated fairly. The director didn't care about this and told the reporter to either cater to the audience's tastes or quit the position. Back in the broadcasting room, the reporter fell into despair. She loved this stage and had once aspired to fight all the injustices in society, but unfortunately, no one supported her. At this point, the reporter finally realized that no one really cared about the so-called truth. What they wanted was bloodshed and slaughter. So in the second live interview, the reporter invited 2 hunters as special guests. The audience applauded because these people took pleasure in hunting mutants, and they did it under the noble guise of cleaning up the virus and providing everyone with a clean environment. As a result, the ratings for this episode skyrocketed, and the audience asked for the reporter's autograph. For the first time, she enjoyed the feeling of being pursued. The young assistant who had always followed the reporter was slightly dissatisfied with this change, but the reporter, caught up in the euphoria of success, didn't have time for that. The thrill of achievement had made her forget her original vows. When asked whether she supported the refugees from the quarantine zone or the local residents, the reporter stated that she did not support either side. She was just telling people the truth. The area around the virus lab in the quarantine zone was riddled with guards on duty and occasional patrol teams passing by. Valera found it impossible to sneak in. Just then, Mitya and Miss Hot, pretending to quarrel as a couple, neared the lab, drawing the attention of the patrol team. Valera quickly used a rope to climb over the fence, successfully infiltrating the lab. Next, it was Scat's turn to perform. After taking over the security system, he knew the ins and outs of the lab like the back of his hand. Under Scat's guidance, Valera felt as comfortable as if he was in his own home. But after much searching, he couldn't find any trace of Nadia. Scott suspected that she was hidden in a secret location, otherwise she would have shown up on the surveillance. Valera had to check each room one by one. His mission was not only to rescue Nadia, but also to kill the evil Petya and Ava. Unexpectedly, Petya and Ava had started to quarrel amongst each other. After knocking out Ava, Petya swiftly took out the collar detonator. He reached Nadia's secret cell before Valera, injecting her with a glucose shot and telling her he was letting her go. By the time Nadia had recovered from her confusion, her shackles had been removed, even the deadly collar bomb. Petya warned her that she would have to rely on herself from now on, as the mad Eva was planning to kill her and her child. Meanwhile, Ava had awoken from her unconscious state and realized her detonator was missing. She understood everything instantly. Valera, on the other hand, finally found the room where Nadia was being held, only to be hit with a sonic attack. Fortunately, Nadia was too weak to sustain the attack and collapsed halfway. Valera sighed in relief, then remembered to ask about Petya and Ava's whereabouts. Scat, remotely commanding the operation, urged him to leave with Nadia first. Just as Valera was about to exit to see the situation, Ava suddenly walked in, gun in hand. Valera and Nadia were in a desperate situation. Ava began talking nonsense, saying she regretted Valera had not followed her in the past. The recovered Nadia suddenly reached out. Valera seized the opportunity to snatch the gun, instantly turning the tables. Ava was shot, but she didn't die and transformed into a mutant form. Without any hesitation, Valera shot her in the head, sending her straight to meet Satan. Seeing Nadia still too weak to walk, he decided to seek out his other enemy, Petya, for revenge. But to everyone's surprise, a black sedan stopped in front of the lab. It's the assassin from Summit. He walked into the lab and started killing everyone he saw, without talking any nonsense like Eva. It didn't take long for him to find the unconscious Nadia and forcibly take her sexy body away. Scat saw this from the surveillance and wanted to warn Valera, but Valera wasn't wearing his earpiece because he had caught Petya. Seeing Nadia disappear, Valera was furious. Remembering the scene of Petya torturing his extra ex-girlfriend, he didn't hesitate to stab him with his dagger. Splattering blood stained his entire body. At that moment, Valera seemed like a demon reincarnate. Suddenly, he remembered Olga's warning that he would be turned by his hatred into his enemies. Valera's blood-stained hands couldn't help but tremble. It wasn't long before the military guards arrived. Scott could only watch helplessly as Valera was captured on the spot. The soldiers reported to Andrew that only Ava's corpse and the injured, unconscious Petya were found in the secret room. Upon hearing that Nadia had been taken away by the assassin, Mitya was nearly furious. Scott comforted Mitya and assured him that he would find a way to track Nadia's whereabouts. Sure enough, after the assassin drove into an abandoned warehouse, he contacted the boss of Summit immediately. He reported that the mission was accomplished and asked for arrangements to leave the quarantine zone. The boss showed a confident smile, believing that as long as Nadia was in their grasp, no one could easily convict him due to his company's creation of the virus. Unbeknownst to them, Scat had overheard their conversation, and using phone tracking, he found Nadia's hiding place. On the other hand, the reporter exposed to the public the existence of the zombie queen Nadia during a live broadcast. She revealed that Nadia not only had self-awareness, but also could control an army of mutants, even reproduce. The audience was indignant, believing that Nadia should be eliminated immediately. In no time, Nadia's name became a huge concern for residents. However, the reporter was soon met by the military bigwig, who blamed her for causing public panic. Given the reporter's status, the bigwig could only persuade her, hoping she could guide public opinion and make people believe that the military was working hard to develop a cure. After listening, the reporter smiled and said she would consider it. The impact of her last show was fermenting at a terrifying speed. Even professional hunters were searching for Nadia throughout the quarantine zone. The assassin was unaware that he had been targeted. As soon as he left the abandoned factory, the internet influencer and her team appeared. Seeing Nadia hiding in the car, they were overjoyed. The weakened Nadia could only watch the clowns jump around. Just when the influencer aimed her gun at Nadia's belly, Mitya, who had tracked them down, suddenly appeared. He had no fear in his eyes. Even if he was to die, he wanted to die with Nadia. The internet influencer laughed crazily, questioning if he alone thought he could play the hero and save the beauty. But the next moment, her eyes turned blank. It turned out Nadia had used mind control, causing several of her companions to be shot and fall instantly. With Mitya's appearance, Nadia's abilities had recovered to their peak. She slowly approached the influencer and made her turn into a mindless mutant. The only survivor immediately ran away for his shitty life with his camera. Nadia's anger hadn't subsided. She hadn't forgotten the assassin who had taken her out of the lab. Not long after, the assassin, oblivious to what had happened, returned with his luggage. As he was puzzled by the bodies on the ground, Nadia, hiding in the car, launched a sonic attack. The assassin tried to struggle, but Nadia slashed his arm with a slap. At this time, Scat also arrived. He wanted to know where his hacker friend had been taken. The assassin said he would find out soon and then died of poison. Nadia was a bit at a loss, as she had only accidentally scratched him. On the other side, the reporter heeded the military's advice. During her live broadcast, she assured viewers that the zombie queen had been controlled and there was no need to excessively worry about her. However, at that moment, the surviving hunter stormed into the broadcast room, holding a video he had just shot. Upon seeing the footage of Nadia manipulating the internet influencer to kill several people, the audience showed expressions of shock and fear. They collectively cried out in a chicken voice that Nadia must die. As the show was on the verge of chaos, the reporter felt somewhat irked. She called out Nadia's name into the camera and challenged her to join the live broadcast if she wanted to clear her name. However, Nadia was not watching the live show at the time. Miss Hot ran over to flex her terminal disease and requested Nadia to infect her voluntarily. Though understanding the reason behind the request, Nadia denied it outright. She knew well the pain mutants could bring upon themselves and their loved ones. Death seemed a better outcome than that. Miss Hot, who was determined to survive, wouldn't hear it. She quietly cut off one of Nadia's poisonous nails while she was sound asleep like a pig. Although Nadia screamed a timely warning and Scott immediately gave chase, it was too late. Miss Hot had already cut her palm with Nadia's nail. She told Scat not to follow her, fearing that she would lose her sanity after the transformation. But Scat wouldn't abandon her hot body. By the time Miss Hot stopped and turned around again, her eyes had turned pitch black. Scat believed that his hot girlfriend, even if transformed, would not attack him. To his surprise, Miss Hot remained expressionless and even launched a sonic attack. This indicates that Miss Hot never loved him. Just then, a man in a suit appeared, holding a strange device that made Miss Hot stand still. The unconscious Scott was taken away by several men in suits. On the other side, Mitya and Nadia finally saw the reporter's live streaming invitation, but they decided not to join the commotion. They had already planned to stay in the quarantine zone forever. Just then, Nadia sensed strangers approaching. When she stepped out to look, it turned out to be the madman Petya. Apparently, he had implanted a tracker in Nadia at some unknown time. Unbelievably, he was still obsessed with researching the virus antidote. Nadia remembered that Petya had once saved her in the lab, so she agreed to cooperate with him because she longed for a normal life. Petya was overjoyed and stated that before they could begin their collaboration, they must rid Nadia of the public's attention. So they came up with a plan. Before long, the reporter received a call from Nadia. Nadia agreed to a live interview, but the time and place would be determined by her. Moreover, it must be a live broadcast. The reporter was overjoyed and immediately found the military bigwig. She assured him that she would guide the conversation to reduce the public's hostility towards Nadia. However, she had one condition: they must release Valera from prison. Over at Scott's, after being taken away by the men in suits, he woke up to see his hacker friend who welcomed him to the Glacier Project, which seemed to also be related to controlling mutants and was secretly underway. The next day, the reporter received a message from Nadia. The meeting place was outside an abandoned factory in the quarantine zone. Without hesitation, she hopped into the live broadcast van and rushed over. By this time, the area was already teeming with mutants. Still, the reporter remained calm. She knew that Nadia meant her no harm. Once all preparations were in place, the reporter started asking the questions. But Nadia's answers diverged from the questions. She said the previously broadcast video of the internet influencer was incomplete. The woman had actually tried to kill her child, and Nadia had retaliated in self-defense. Nadia had been the victim all along. She yearned for a normal life and hoped that regular citizens could accept the existence of mutants, as only love could restore their sanity. The reporter was moved by her words. She warned Nadia of possible ambushes nearby, though Nadia seemed to be already prepared. With the mutants covering her, she swiftly got into Mitya's van. But in the next moment, a blazing fire erupted. The vehicle carrying Nadia was engulfed in flames, and the surrounding mutants scattered in panic. The spectators watching the live broadcast cheered and applauded for the death of the zombie queen. Fast forward 6 months, the long-absent reporter approached her former assistant, hoping they could work together to promote the acceptance of mutants. However, the assistant was evasive. Then, a bullet struck the reporter's heart, and the once popular host died there on the street. The assistant was also quickly silenced. Meanwhile, in prison, Valera was finally released, found innocent. This was partly due to Olga's manipulation, but mostly because Valera had let go of his hatred. Back in the lab, aside from the zombified Eva, he hadn't killed a single living person, even sparing his archenemy Petya. Most surprisingly, Nadia, who was supposedly killed in the explosion, was now in a luxury hotel in the quarantine zone. Obviously, the car explosion was a faked death scheme arranged by Petya. Only in this way could Nadia escape the covetous eyes of various forces. Eventually, with Petya's help, Nadia gave birth to a healthy baby. As Mitya held their daughter, the mutants around her all knelt down. In that way, they seemed to vow their loyalty to the newly born Queen of Mutants. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.